Hi, I'm Jennifer Simmons with AIM. Welcome to the first 2021 legislative session weekly recap. Joining us today are Matt Greller, CEO of AIM, Lindsay Moss, Chief Government Affairs Officer for AIM, Jenna Nepper, our Government Affairs Manager, and Campbell Ritchie, our Policy Director. Thanks, guys. Things are going to be a little bit different today. It's usually just Matt and me offering a quick legislative update for you, but we're gonna approach this with the whole team today and give you a full picture of what's been happening during the first week of the legislative session. So Matt, why don't you kind of set the table with what's been happening over at the legislature?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Happy to do that. Happy to be with you all this week. It's a slow start. Don't have to tell any of you tuning in to the video today that it's been a crazy week nationally. It's been a sad week, frustrating week, a lot of anger, a lot of concern, I think. But all that doesn't mean that there's not business to be done at the Indiana General Assembly. We're back as usual, ready to face the hundreds of bills that will have an impact on cities and towns this 2021 session. Looking forward to advancing some of our own initiatives that are COVID related, that some are not COVID related. We'll get into those here in just a little bit. But first, I think it probably makes a little bit of sense to talk about what this session is going to look like. It's obviously going to be very different. I was just thinking that it's similar to lobbying or advocating via a drive-through bank. You pull up to the window, you talk to the teller behind glass through an intercom. That's a very similar, I think, analogy to what our lobbying team will be facing over at the State House this year. Very challenging. Lindsay, you're in charge of all that effort this year. So what's it going to look like?
Yeah, well, over the summer, legislators were meeting and talking through the Legislative Continuity Committee about how different things would look this session. So we've been hearing it for months now and hearing all of the protocols that they're putting forth and warning us that things are going to look a lot different, but you really don't get it until you start to experience it. And it was a pretty much an eye-opener this week in terms of how different things are going to be. Lobbyists are really only going over to the State House at the request and encouragement of leadership to testify in committees, do your testimony and leave, only be there for meetings, go for your meeting and leave. And as a team, we were only physically in the building a handful of times to do committee testimony and have in-person meetings with legislators. This is a much different environment than a normal year, not just with our communication with legislators, but also with having all of the other stakeholders on the bills that we're working on in the same room, where you can have, impromptu meetings and start negotiating and talking about what people are trying to accomplish with their bills. We're just not seeing each other anymore and having the opportunity to have those same sorts of daily conversations. So everyone is a little bit in the dark right now in terms of what other groups are trying to accomplish. Leadership has said that they want to have as transparent of a session as possible. And, they are posting things for the most part earlier than normal and trying to take all of those steps, but there just truly is no alternative to the in-person interactions that we are realizing more than ever we heavily rely on during a typical legislative session.
So with everything being so limited over there, what's the governor, what's his agenda going to look like? What's he going to do? Is he going to be able to offer the same kind of comprehensive agenda he usually does?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, I guess, Jennifer. In looking and listening to the governor, I guess, first of all, like I've said many times over the last 10 months or so, the governor's team has been really, really good to work with, pandemic related issues. And And we're seeing that, I think, carry over to his agenda a little bit. Things like virtual meetings are on his agenda. You know, he has put forward executive order after executive order, 30 days at a time, allowing cities and towns, in our case, the ability to hold virtual meetings because of pandemic related concerns. And that's been a tremendous help. So that's in his agenda. So that's a super positive thing, I think, for cities and towns, that we can begin to make that a permanent solution. That's on our agenda too, as the team will get into here in a little bit. You know, the governor's agenda remains bold. It encompasses things like school funding and economic initiatives. I think another issue that's near and dear to our heart, as well as many others, is broadband. You know, he has continues to make that a focal point, expanding broadband. We've all heard the stories about the stress that's on the system from at-home work, at-home learning, all those things. So we're happy to be a partner on that issue as well. You know, roads and transportation continue to be a big part of the governor's agenda. While it's not necessarily a legislative agenda, he's continued to make sure that the community crossings program remains in place, which is absolutely critical to cities and towns. So we're glad to see that. A new call for projects just went out the other day, in fact. So I'd say the governor's agenda, to answer your question, is bold, to say the least. I don't see any backing down or scaling back anything that he would typically do. In fact, probably just the opposite. I think he's trying to use this as an opportunity to take actions that they feel are necessary. And for the most part, I think we're looking forward to working with them on the vast majority of things in the agenda. Well, that's always part of Zoom. You know, you forget to unmute yourself. I think Jennifer was talking about probably some other agendas in the legislative session, maybe what's going to happen on the House and Senate side, and the team can jump in there and talk about those things.
I mean, it was a brilliant question. I'm not gonna lie. If you know, the dog heard it, it was good.
That's all right. All we need now is my dogs to start barking or something, and then it'll be a real Zoom meeting.
Proceed.
Sorry, guys. You want to talk about the agendas that the House and the Senate are looking at and what issues they might bring on?
Yeah, Jenna, do you want to talk a little bit about the COVID immunity bill that was heard this week and where that's headed?
Yeah, we've seen COVID immunities on the governor's agenda, the House Republicans and Senate Republicans. It was already heard this week in Senate Judiciary and is scheduled to be heard next week in House Judiciary. Both bills are a little different, but essentially it provides immunity to businesses, local units of government, healthcare providers as it relates to COVID exposure. So for local units of government, it's a supplement to the Tort Claims Act. And it's one of those issues that's going to continue to be negotiated throughout the session, and one we'll continue to monitor moving forward. But essentially providing extra protection from lawsuits unless there is gross negligence or willful misconduct moving forward. And I think some of the other budget items Campbell wanted to talk about included the budget, education, those types of things moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. This budget year, so it's a budget year. It's also a redistricting year. So those are two big priorities. They have to have a new budget done by June 30th. And one of the pandemic-related issues that's on both House and Senate agendas is, well, during the prior budget, they said that virtual education will be funded 85% of what in-person education is funded at, in order to deal with some virtual charter issues. That, of course, spilled over into when every single school went virtual. How would that law be applied? So there's a big priority where some bills that they started going through this week to deal with the issue of making sure that schools that were forced into virtual by virtue of the pandemic are fully funded. And other priorities in the budget are people are talking about. Obviously, rural broadband is another priority that's going to be in the budget that a lot of legislators are talking about. But, you know, with the revenue reductions this year, the budget's going to be tight. So a lot of priorities are going to be difficult to fund this year.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, and I was just going to say, there's a key difference on the Senate Republican budget. Lindsay, they had added Senate Bill 5, which deals with local health departments. And I think that's slated to be heard later this month in committee. And didn't know if you wanted to provide an update on that.
Yeah, this is all of these conversations about the pandemic and the actions that the governor had to take, that local communities have had to take in response to the pandemic. There is a very robust conversation occurring amongst a lot of legislators about how the governor handles executive authority in times of an emergency, and how local health departments and other units of local government can work together and try to deal with these situations. But there definitely is a heavy focus on the Senate Republican side in particular, that maybe some local health departments have enforced fines or otherwise have penalized businesses without oversight of elected officials. So next week, there's a bill being heard that would allow businesses who have been subject to a local health order to appeal their case to the county council, or for a city that has a health department to the city council to try to add some elected oversight, local elected oversight into some of the decisions that county health boards have made.
What we've talked about governor's priorities and some other legislative leadership priorities. Let's touch on what AIM's really going to focus on or try to focus on this session. I know we always get really deterred into paying attention to bills that are filed by legislators that may affect cities and towns, but what are we going to do proactively? Let's talk about that just a little bit.
So previously, Matt mentioned that the allowing virtual meetings is on the governor's agenda. It's also on our agenda to allow, in times of emergency, fully virtual meetings. But even in times when there's not an emergency, some allowance for virtual participation in normal meetings. Not entirely virtual participation, but just to provide more modernization and flexibility for local boards, city councils, BZAs, and all the like. There are also some focus on financial instruments of local governments, specifically road funding. As you probably all are aware, there's a restriction on the motor vehicle highway funds that come from the state to local governments. 50% has to be put into capital expenses. But as the amount of money coming down was reduced as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns and other restrictions, though the MVH funds are reduced, but the restriction stays in place. So we're looking for some flexibility on that 50% restriction. Both of these bills are starting in the Senate currently. Have already been filed, one on loosening MVH restrictions and one on virtual meetings. And we're going to continue working on those two issues throughout the session, trying to use those or other bills as vehicles.
So, Lindsay, Matt, let's shift gears just for a second, since we have everybody's attention, and this is not a legislative issue, but an issue that we have talked to our membership about a lot over the last several months, and that's the CARES Act and reimbursement to municipalities using CARES Act funding. What is the latest on CARES Act funding, and what do our folks need to know? Lindsay,
Well, first, let me jump in real quick and just say thanks to our team for the reach out and the work they did, and thanks to our membership. We used the first allocation, the $300 million. Almost all of it was utilized in our allocation, and we expect it to be almost completely utilized. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of question So I think we did a good job as an organization, as a membership, of making sure that we really got in there and put the money to use where it needed to be, answered unknown questions. And Jenna and Campbell and Lindsay did a fantastic job of working with our membership to do that. Lots of recent developments, and Lindsay can jump in and cover those. What's next?
Yeah, so really all summer long, we were waiting for Congress to act in hopes that they would extend the date or otherwise expand the CARES Act program and the level of assistance that would be available to local communities. They finally did take action to at least extend the date for the use of the CARES Act money. So the state no longer has until December 30th to get all of the CARES Act money out the door or encumbered. They have some more time. So they have extended the deadline for the safety awareness program until January 29th. Just as a reminder, that was an additional 10% in addition to your original CARES Act allocation that you could be reimbursed for certain expenses, especially focused on PR type campaigns, ensuring compliance with local businesses, education on restrictions, those sorts of expenses as you work with your citizens. So again, if you haven't applied for that additional 10%, you now have until January 29th to do that.
Don't forget our, let me move over here, our Every Action Counts work is still ongoing. You can access that from our various resources, and there's all sorts of materials available to you. Jennifer, I don't know, you can probably, I'm not supposed to be asking the questions, but
No, that's
you
great.
can probably share a little bit more about
Yeah.
what's all available if people haven't used it yet.
Yep, I was just thinking the same thing. I was glad you did that. I was going to have you move to the side to show the Every Action Counts logo down there. So yeah, so as Lindsay mentioned, that funding deadline has been extended to the end of January. And one thing that a few communities have done, they've taken the Every Action Counts materials that AIM has available via Dropbox, and we're continuing to update those regularly. We have some more coming in the next week or so. You can take those materials and print them. We've had one community has actually created billboards with the materials that we are providing. You can use them on your social media, use them on your website. But if you have any expenses relative to the Every Action Counts campaign, they may be eligible for reimbursement under the program that Lindsay was just talking about. So that's certainly something to look into. You'd want to verify that with IFA first. But we do know that at least in December, several communities were using Every Action Counts materials for their CARES Act campaign. So if you have any questions, let us know. You can email Erin Jameson Koenig as well to get access to Dropbox materials. You can look on our website and give you more information there on Every Action Counts. So it's a great campaign, and we've had more than 20 communities utilize the program so far. Probably more, some that we're not aware of once we opened up the Dropbox to everyone.
We definitely didn't rehearse this, but while we're talking about federal issues, with a new president taking office in January, a power shift in Congress, it would appear, at least from our counterparts at the National League of Cities, that there will be more COVID-related relief discussions happening. You've all heard about the extra stimulus checks directly to citizens in the U.S., but what you haven't heard as much about is direct relief to cities and towns from Congress. And I think that at least those discussions will probably reignite once the new Congress is in session and in place, and the new president. So more to come there. Don't bank on a relief coming, but I think that that's certainly an opportunity. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that or not. Perfect.
That at all.
All right. I think I think unless anybody has something else to add, that's a wrap for this week. Just a reminder that at the bottom of every weekly legislative summary from AIM, you can look at the entire bill tracking list. That'll show you everything we're tracking thus far. Obviously, since we're just the first week into session, that list will grow over the next couple of weeks. So this is just what's been dropped so far that we are monitoring. That's in your bill tracking list. If you're interested, keep an eye on that every week. It will grow over the next few weeks. And then, of course, there's the top 5 bills that are summarized in your legislative summary. And as always, if you have any questions, you can email or call any one of us and we'll try to answer your questions. But look forward to joining you again next week and have a great weekend.
Thanks.